Welcome to You and Your Pets. I'm Jim Horton, and we're with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital, and a special guest tonight. We have Dr. Jay Levenheim, who is a pediatrician and has a practice in West Orange, and also is the clinical chief at St. Barnabas Hospital for Pediatrics. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we're going to be talking in this show about a broad range of topics in caring for your pets, specifically with relation to diseases like ticks and fleas and other kinds of parasites that can transmit from animals to humans. So let's get started. What is the first issue we're going to talk about, Dr. Rogers?
Well, I think we've received notices from the CDC and local health departments about the particularly warm, dry winter. And as a result, we feel, or the authorities feel, that there's going to be an increase in ticks and fleas going about this coming summer. It's already started. I've seen more instances of ticks and fleas in animals than I have in previous Aprils and May. So I think that's probably where we should start.
Okay. And let me ask you something. I want to move it right to you right away.
Sure.
How often are we talking about ticks and fleas getting on young children?
Tick bites are very common, and flea bites also can be common.
And we're talking about what age? All ages?
All ages, yep.
All ages. So child goes out in the backyard to play, and maybe a deer has been through the backyard. Like in our
Sure.
backyard, there's always deer through the backyard. And they can pick up a tick from the grass or something like that.
Even just something as simple as going out to walk their dog each day.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's come back now to what we can do with animals that with ticks and with fleas.
Well, I think we have to be very careful about where we walk. There are some areas with long grass and bushes where we know the ticks tend to hide out. There's particular tick environments, and those are the areas that we have to be careful, particularly golfers who go into on golf courses and into the rough, into the taller grass around your house, and the edges of the fence where the grass is particularly long, on the reservation where the grass is long, or you're walking through the bush. All those are areas where you can pick up ticks. In terms of fleas, the majority of people pick up fleas either from their dog, because the flea does not live on the dog. It jumps on the dog, takes a blood meal, and jumps off. And if it jumps off into your house, then you have fleas in your house. Mm-hmm. So the environment is really the main source of ticks and fleas. And one has to be careful about where one walks to make sure that you don't pick them up. And even then, you still should check yourself on a regular basis.
I mean, I must admit that I live in fear constantly around my house because we're not far from the reservation, and we've had up to 10 deer at a time on the property. Now, I wear long pants and everything else. I don't ever recall having a tick on me, but it just seems to me that if there are other householders in Maplewood South Orange that are in that kind of environment, that they probably live with a sense of fear as well. Would that be true?
Absolutely true. Tick bites are a very common source of stress in parents when they do find tick bites on children. Most of the time the stress is unnecessary. And with good prevention, with use of bug spray, you can usually prevent most of these tick bites. And usually just by simple removal of the tick itself, you can prevent Lyme disease transmission.
What kind of bug spray? Are we talking about DEET?
Yes, and any bug spray that contains DEET.
Oh, I didn't realize that ticks did not like DEET. I thought that was strictly for fleas and for mosquitoes.
They typically do not.
They do. Oh, okay. All righty. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that a lot of what we talk about in terms of prevention relates to the animals. And if you keep your animals with flea and tick medication and monitor where they run, that will help prevent a lot of fleas and ticks coming into your house or being associated with your bed or your children's bedroom. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I usually recommend, and I try to recommend, that dogs and cats not sleep on the bed, because that obviously could be a source. But I agree with Dr. Levenheim that this is not a common issue, and I think in Essex County we see that about 12%, I think, of the dogs come down with Lyme disease. So it's not common, but because we can't tell which dog has Lyme disease we have to test, or we have to find symptoms, it's stress provoking.
Okay. And I understand, we were talking before the show went on that the tests for Lyme disease have some similarities and some differences between humans and animals. What would be the test for Lyme disease, and when would you do it for a human?
Once you find a tick bite on your child or yourself, most people would like us to test them for Lyme disease right away. However, you don't produce antibodies which are testable till at least 6 weeks after your exposure to a tick. So therefore, we have to wait at least 6 weeks before we can do any blood tests to confirm whether you've received Lyme disease or not.
And the parents going nuts in the 6-week period.
It is worrisome for them, although antibiotics are not necessary in that 6-week period and are not meant to be used for prevention in that 6-week period as well. If you pick up Lyme disease within a decent range of time, it's very treatable and curable disease.
Well, now, you mentioned earlier that there were 3 stages of Lyme in humans. Now, I'm not sure if that's true in pets. Are there 3 stages in pets as well?
Not that I am aware of, but in pets, when we have an animal with Lyme disease, it's often not picked up unless the animal shows lameness. Typically, when we do a heartworm test every 2 years, we might test for Lyme disease. But as Dr. Levenheim pointed out, it's usually something that we test after 3 weeks after the bite. Unfortunately, in animals, they may have been bitten multiple times, so when we finally catch the tick on them, 3 weeks later we'll test them, rather than the 6 weeks they wait in humans.
Once the animals start showing symptoms of lameness, is it incurable at that point, or can you still cure it?
No, I think Lyme disease is very curable.
It's very curable.
There are some end stages, which are not well understood, that affect the kidney in dogs, and that's usually months to years or years after the initial infection. And we do see Lyme kidney disease, and I'm not sure, as of the last conference I went to, there was no complete understanding of that. But yes, there are stages, but unfortunately dogs don't talk to us. So dogs don't say I have a headache or I have a problem. It's when the owners come in with a lameness that is in the right front leg one day, and they come in and 2 days later, and it's the left front leg, and then it's the rear leg, and then we start thinking possibly Lyme disease, or if the owner comes in and says that they've seen a tick. So it's a little bit different. I mean, pediatrics might be very similar to veterinary medicine.
My patients also don't talk to me as much either.
Okay, now go through the 3 stages, I think you
Sure.
mentioned to me, of Lyme.
There's the primary stage, which is usually soon after a tick bite. We can get some muscle aches or myalgias, headache, occasional fever, and what most people associate with Lyme disease is a bullseye or target rash. Now, this rash only occurs in about 20 to 40% of people that have Lyme disease, so it's not a perfect clue. And it also does not have to present at the area of the bite. It can really present anywhere. And that's in the first stage. Typically in the second stage, which is common to pick up Lyme disease in that stage also and very treatable, we see patients with single joint swelling, most commonly in the knee or the larger joints of the body. You can have some cardiac effects, some cardiac arrhythmias. And then as you get into the tertiary or third stages and the later stages of the disease, you tend to get some further cardiac issues and more commonly some neurological issues.
Now, it's very rare now for someone to get to a 3rd stage, is that not correct?
Typically, they're presenting to their doctor prior to that stage, or at least in the beginning of that stage when they're having some headaches or other neurological issues. But because Lyme disease is prevalent in New Jersey, in the areas that we practice in, it's something that's always in the back of our mind when patients present to us with symptoms that we don't quite have a grasp on. So it's a test that we commonly send to check for that.
Now, you mentioned before the program started that there seems to be those physicians who see Lyme disease almost all the time, and those who maybe are a little bit more balanced. And I know that when it comes to a child, parents get very worried very fast, and so if the dog had a tick and the tick got on the child and the child was bitten, you're peeling the mother and the father off the ceiling, and I'm assuming this.
Spend most of my life doing
You
it.
spend most of your life doing that. And that you wait the 6 weeks, you do the test, and they're either negative or say it comes back negative, and they may or may not believe you, right?
Yeah, what I would recommend is any parent or person that has a tick bite on their child or themselves, and they're concerned about it, by all means they should contact their physicians or pediatricians and have an open discussion about what the symptoms to look for, how to treat it if it does come up, and to get more information about Lyme disease, and that's a very easy approach to do for parents, just to talk to their doctors about what's worrying them, and most of the time you can quell their fears just with that.
Okay.
And if I could just make a point here, we're talking about Lyme disease because we're in the Northeast.
Right.
Geographically, it can be all over, and it can be different in different parts of the country.
Right. Even in Europe.
However, we can also see other tick-borne diseases that can be transmitted both to humans and to animals. And at least with animals, my recommendation to all parents of animals is to use flea and tick prevention, because even though we might be able to test for 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 of the tick-borne diseases, there might be 30 tick-borne diseases that we can't test for. So the best prevention is keep the ticks off the animal, keep the ticks off the people. As you said, long pants,
Absolutely
long
true.
sleeves, stay out of areas where you might think there are ticks. And make sure your dog and cat have appropriate flea and tick prevention.
What you're telling me is I shouldn't be mowing my lawn. No.
I guess that's right.
You should also check for ticks also. If you've
Right.
been outside for a little while, your children or yourselves have been outside or hiking or any sort of long grass, it's always a good idea to check your body thoroughly for ticks as well.
And where would you expect to see the ticks in a human?
Really can be anywhere. They can hide kind of anywhere, but typically on the distal extremities, on the arms and the legs, sometimes along the neckline. But they really can be found hidden anywhere because they do move.
What are, if, say, someone goes camping in Colorado, what should they be worried about as a tick-borne disease in Colorado versus, say, New Jersey?
Oh,
Go ahead.
go ahead. No.
Things like Rocky Mountain spotted fever is a tick-borne disease, commonly in the southeast. But some in the southeast, some in the southwest as well. But there are other types that typically cause fevers and some different types of rashes.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to take a break here fairly soon, but I want to make sure that we get just very quickly into some of the other areas. We were talking about heartworm and roundworm, and I think what we need to do after the break is get into those in more detail. But very quickly, what is roundworm?
Roundworm is an intestinal parasite of dogs, cats. It's also carried by some wild animals, and that's what makes it so prevalent around New Jersey, because raccoons, skunks, and other carnivores can poop where they poop, and your dog can pick it up. So roundworms are intestinal parasites, and they go along with hookworms and whipworms, and they
Okay.
can be transmitted to humans.
And and you can actually see these in children once in a while, roundworm.
Once in a while, yeah.
You do see it.
Yeah.
Pretty rare, though, isn't it?
It is rare.
It is rare. Okay, that's fine. All right, well, let's take a break first, and then we'll come back and we'll start talking about those in greater detail. I'm Jim Horton, this is You and Your Pets, and we will be right back.
Television is a powerful and influential medium that allows different groups the opportunity to produce programming that directly affects their own communities. Public, educational, and government access channels ensure that all people, regardless of race, age, gender, disability, religion, or economic status, have access to local government information and the use of a public communication forum. Make sure everyone has a voice. Support your local PEG channels.
Welcome back to You and Your Pets with our resident expert, Dr. Ernest Rogers of the Maplewood Animal Hospital, and our special guest, Dr. Jay Lemenheim, who is a pediatrician and has his practice in West Orange, and also is the clinical chief for pediatrics at St. Barnabas. And we were talking just before the break about heartworm and also about roundworm. And I'd like to start off just very quickly with how does roundworm present itself in a human? If someone comes in and you're looking at them and you say, that's roundworm, what should a person be looking for? Is it on the hands, first of all?
It's typically on the feet, but it can be on the hands as well. Roundworm typically presents as a dermatitis type rash, an itchy rash, and classically with roundworm, although you can see it in really any solid organ of the body, you will see like a snake-like lesion embedded underneath the skin.
And that is the actual roundworm?
Yes.
Okay, how do you get rid of it?
They're called anti-parasitic drugs. Thank you, Dr. Rogers, that treat these types of worms.
Okay. How do dogs, you mentioned dogs get it from picking it up from the scat of wild animals.
Correct.
How do you find it in dogs?
Typically in dogs, we do, because of the zoonotic potential, the potential for this to go to humans, I try and encourage all my clients who come in to bring a poop sample. I say it's cheap and I want it. And they generally come in with it with their annual exam. We send it off and it's examined. The feces are examined by a lab for the different eggs. You don't always see the worms in the poop. So the feces are examined by the lab for the eggs in there, and by the type of eggs, you can identify the type of intestinal parasite. People sometimes get intestinal parasites confused with heartworm. And heartworm is actually a blood-borne parasite that I have to take blood to assess, and then we do that in a separate test. So just to clear that up, in any time we're looking at parasites, we have two separate tests that we do in veterinary medicine. One is the heartworm test, and the other one is the intestinal parasite test. The intestinal parasite test uses feces. The heartworm test uses a drop of blood.
Okay, and I understand that heartworm is quite rare in humans. Is that correct?
It's very rare. Human beings are a poor host for heartworm, although occasionally it can find its way into the lungs of humans and can be misread on chest x-rays.
Okay.
And we see a similar thing in cats. Heartworm goes to the heart in dogs, but in cats we can also see it in their lungs, and we can see that kind of thing. So we do have something in common, Dr. Lowenheim.
Other than heartworm and roundworm, there's hookworm, right?
Hookworm and whipworm are other
Hookworm
parasites.
and whipworm. Now, first of all, let me step back and ask, how common are heartworm and roundworm in New Jersey? I think you said roundworm was fairly common. Is that correct?
Roundworm, hookworm, and whipworm are found in a lot of animals. We have the advantage of we try and test almost every animal that comes through, so we have a better grasp of what's going on with our roundworm, hookworm, and whipworm. We also try and encourage our clients to do the heartworm test. So when we actually look at the incidence of roundworm, hookworm, and whipworm, it's fairly high. I would guess probably 30 to 40% of my clients would have it.
That's surprising.
That's simply because animals are indiscriminate about what they pick up. They will find, as you say, wildlife scat on the ground and, whoa, Tootsie Rolls, let's get that. Or they might pick up grass or other debris on the ground that has been infected with roundworm, hookworm, or whipworm. So it really is, as Dr. Lowenheim will tell you, an oral fecal route. It's poop into the mouth is basically what it is. So dogs are more willing and less distinguishing than cats, but either one can pick up the eggs and start the oral cycle.
Is there any protection that a homeowner can use? I mean, obviously we have flea and tick medicine, but is there any kind of protection for roundworm, hookworm that you can put on your animal, or is it that's just something you get and you grab in testing in the annual test?
Well, typically what we do is we identify the parasite in the animal, particularly with the intestinal parasites. Once we identify that it exists, we then treat the animal for that intestinal parasite, and many of the heartworm products also prevent reinfection.
Is that right?
So picking the right heartworm product can be important. They have they contain chemicals that will inhibit the reinfection of an animal, but it has to be identified. The adults have to be removed, and then that's when the heartworm.
Is that true for roundworm and hookworm as well?
Roundworm and hookworm, correct. I don't think they have yet discovered something that will prevent whipworm.
Okay.
Whipworm is fairly rare, though.
It is fairly rare. But you can give a product to your animal that once they're free of hookworm will keep them free of hookworm.
There are a number of products out there for heartworm. Now, I'm talking heartworm products to prevent heartworm.
Yeah.
But their secondary effect is that they can inhibit the reinfection by whipworm, or by roundworm or hookworm.
Okay, that's fine. I think that's important to understand. I was not aware of that, and I know that you've seen our animal more than a few times. Now that we've talked about a number of these diseases, I'd like to step back, and you mentioned earlier what parents can do to protect their children, but what else can a parent do? I mean, you can't put your child in a playpen and leave them there for the rest of their lives. I mean, that just doesn't work. So what do you advise parents? I mean, other than inspecting their children constantly and trying to get them to wear long sleeves, which they'll never do, and not wear shorts, which they will never do. You know, they'll always will want to wear shorts and flip-flops and that sort of thing. Is it just something you live with?
No, there are other ways to prevent most of these illnesses. One thing, especially when we're dealing with worms, is to really make sure you're picking up after your animal instead of leaving the excrement in the lawn. You want to make sure to pick it up each time so the child isn't running and playing around it. And also good hand washing, especially as we get into the summer and barbecue season and everything, when kids are running around as you're barbecuing before they go to eat and put their hands in their mouth, or put their hands on the food and then in their mouth. Good hand washing, and also wearing socks and shoes will prevent a lot of these types of bites and infections as well.
Is that really realistic, though? I mean, can you imagine a kid being forced to wear socks and shoes?
Not my
on
kid.
I was going to say, that doesn't even happen for your children, right?
It's good advice. But
Good advice. So practically speaking,
I would say the number one thing would be hand washing.
hand washing.
Absolutely.
So make sure that Junior, every single time, goes into the bathroom and does
Washes
a good
his
hand
hands,
good
absolutely.
washing. And that's a good habit to have anyway.
Yep.
I
Okay.
think we have to look at another issue here. Many people have playgrounds in their backyard. Sometimes it's a sandbox. Cats don't know a sandbox from a litter box. And when your kids are playing and find Tootsie Rolls, we know how that happened. So we want to cover the sandbox. Always have a cover on it so that stray animals can't get in there and use it as a litter box. Then, of course, you want to hose down your equipment on a regular basis so that if animals have left feces on there, it's washed away and taken care of. So it's really taking care of your garden facility, and that will help both your pet and your child and yourself.
What are some of the places that a person can go on the internet to find out about this? You had a couple websites. I'd like you to give them here right now, if you would, please.
Right. Well, there's one website that I found that actually will allow anyone in New Jersey, or anyone in North America, I guess, to look at the incidence of parasites in pets. When I reviewed the site, it really only dealt with dogs. It didn't have a lot on cats. But the site was called petsandparasites.org. And it was by the Companion Animal Parasite Council. And what it is basically you enter the website, you pick up New Jersey, and then you pick up the county in which you live, which is Essex. And it'll give you the incidence of hookworm, roundworm, Lyme disease, tick-borne disease, fleas in dogs, and sometimes in cats by county. So you can actually pick it up and see how your county is doing, and it actually goes back to 2008. So you can look at 2011 stats right back to 2008 and see how it's changing.
And all these are reportable? A veterinarian has to actually report each time they find an animal with this, or is this, where do they get this data from?
I think the data is collected from veterinarians as a
Okay.
sample, as a representative sample. For instance, they haven't contacted me. But this is a professional organization that I have confidence in. And looking at their information, I believe that what they do is collect it from veterinarians and probably from some of the parasite companies, the companies that sell parasite preventatives.
Okay. And what other sites would you, I think you had another site that you recommended.
Yeah, the other one, and I think Dr. Lovenheim can speak to this better than I can, is the CDC Lyme disease site, but cdc.gov is the actual site. And the CDC is a well-recognized site. It's founded on good science, and I think Dr. Levenheim will agree that it's a good site
Absolutely.
for the average person to go to look up information about Lyme disease. They have how to pull ticks off, of course humans, how to identify different signs and rashes associated with Lyme disease. So it's quite a good site. It's well written, and it's really made for the layperson.
Okay, which, by the way, that's something I didn't ask and I should have asked. Parent finds tick on child.
What to do?
What to do?
The most, if you're not sure, you can bring the child to your doctor and they'll remove it for you. But if you take forceps or tweezers and put the end right next to the skin and just pinch and pull the tick out, that's really mostly what you need to do. Occasionally, the mouth parts can still remain in the skin, and that's typically not a big problem. If a lot remains, then bring your child to the doctor. And sometimes you can get just a local irritation reaction from removing the tick, but that's not Lyme disease. It's just a local irritation.
So what happens if you, which I think I did once, you pull off the body and you leave the entire
The
head?
mouth parts, yeah.
Yeah,
Most commonly, that's fine for prevention of the disease.
okay.
And
It
I-
just looks bad.
Just looks bad, and eventually it works itself out with time.
Okay.
I just want to make a comment that not all ticks carry Lyme disease
Right.
or transmittable diseases. So you may get a tick on you that has no disease at all. It's just not very pleasant to look at, and it's bothersome.
Okay. Is there anything else that we should talk about on the risk of parasites and other creatures getting on animals and also on humans? We have about 2 minutes left, so I just thought we should wrap this up.
Well, in 30 seconds, I would say keep your dog healthy, see your veterinarian regularly, use flea and tick prevention, particularly this year because it's going to be a bad flea and tick season, and make sure that your dog is tested for intestinal parasites and you clean up all the feces, as Dr. Levenheim says. I think from the pet perspective, those are some of the important elements that have to be addressed.
Okay.
And for
I would just also say, I think if you've been hiking or camping or in the outdoors or traveled overseas or even anywhere in this country and have been around dogs or other animals that you don't know whether they've had vaccinations and shots and treatments, typically strays, and your children or yourselves present with any strange symptoms, just to follow up with your physician and just mention those encounters.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you very much. This has been a very informative session,
Thank you.
and I learned a lot that I did not know before this session tonight. So this has been You and Your Pet. I'm Jim Horton, and I want to thank you very much for watching.